Hello and welcome to the podcast guesting for beginners tutorial. Now, I'm going to make this video, which is going to be an entire full tutorial on how to make podcast guesting your top and most profitable marketing channel. So welcome. The goal here is to get you from podcast newbie to seasoned pro, who sees direct revenue from getting on podcasts. Lots of people, I'm sure you know them, are getting on podcasts all the time, whether you like it or not, and they're probably just using it as a bit of an ego boost to benefit them. But I guarantee it's not making them money. So what we're going to do in this full course, I'm going to give away everything. I'm going to show you exactly how you can make money as a podcast guest and make it your top marketing channel. This is going to be super efficient and it's going to get you the biggest bang for your buck. This is something I've been meaning to put out for a long time. You know, I couldn't find any help on being a podcast guest when I started, let alone using it to drive revenue to my business. So when I started out, this video is exactly what I would have wanted to be able to watch. A long form, no fluff, just value tutorial on how I can actually just go on podcasts and spread my message far and wide. This is exactly what we need to be doing in our business in 2025 and beyond. And I'll teach you exactly how we do it and how we have built our own podcast and what we look for in guests. So I want to give this away for free, mainly so you don't get scammed by other people. You know, I've paid money for this kind of thing before to try and find out, you know, how to do PR, how to do, marketing in general, copywriting, whatever. And it always feels a bit like a scam to me. Not everyone, but a lot of them. And so I want to give this to you to make sure that I know for free you're getting something of high quality. You know, I think that is so valuable. Something that is very, very decent, very good, gets you results. And, you know, this is going to be over an hour-long video. It's going to be something that you can take away, you can reference, come back to. I want it to be your curriculum. I want you to have this video and be able to go through the parts, revisit, and make sure that it actually works for you. So by the end of this program, I promise is that you will be a confident podcast guest with a solid strategy to get on top shows and have an efficient back end to make it worth your time. We all know that the way to get success is to be consistent, but we're not going to be consistent if we're not working towards that result or in the short term seeing some sort of result. So that's what we're going to make sure happens. And the part that I mentioned about having a solid strategy, this is not about just shooting from the hip and going on as many podcasts as possible. We're going to put this together in the way that we're going to need to, or you're going to need to over the next 5 years, because marketing is changing. Podcasting as a whole game is changing. I predict now that over the next 5 years, podcasting will be the biggest marketing channel because of, you know, AI means that we're looking for that human connection. And by going on podcasts with already well-known and trusted hosts, you're able to get your message across in more interesting and exciting ways. But if you're not on specific shows and targeted shows and niche shows, and if you're not good as a guest, you're very quickly going to get paper shifted out and lose all of that opportunity. So now is the time, you're ahead of the curve, to really start leaning into what it means to be a top guest and how we're going to strategize to get the most out of this. By the way, my name is Freddie. Whether you know me or not, maybe you listen to our podcast, maybe you followed this channel, maybe you've never seen me before. Who am I? Well, I used to work as effectively head of growth for the world's largest digital publisher. I quit my job in 2022 after having quite a serious car crash with my fiance, and I really reevaluated what life meant. I've been on this conveyor belt through life. I was just pushed towards going to university, doing a master's, working the corporate jobs. And I didn't really look around me. I did a bit of traveling. I was able to start these little tiny side hustle businesses here and there, but nothing ever worked. I always knew that I wanted to start a business and I wanted to live a life of freedom, but it's very difficult in this day and age, or at least I found it, with no entrepreneurs to lead me. And so what I did after that car crash was really reevaluate my life in 2022. I sold my house, I quit my job, and within 2 months I'd moved 4,000 miles around the world to completely start from scratch, to start a business, and alongside that start a podcast that I've always wanted to do. And as I mentioned earlier, there was very little advice on how to start a podcast. And what I very, very quickly found was that when I started a podcast, the best way to grow a podcast is to be a podcast guest. Then you start to realize that actually you don't necessarily even need your own podcast. The most efficient way, which is why we teach this today, is to just be a guest. There's no investment into podcasting. You just be a guest, get very good, and you'll be so surprised at how excited everyone is to listen to you, but also how far you can go. And so that business that we started is now touching 7 figures, and the podcast that I started now sits in the top 1% of podcasts around the world, which I'm incredibly, incredibly proud of. And I guess what that shows is that with the over 100 episodes we'd had, we've also interviewed over $3 billion worth of guests. Those guests include people like Dan Henry, Chris Do, Daniel Priestley. There's been millionaires, billionaires, Olympians. We have had the highest caliber guests that you could possibly imagine. And our list of guests for when we do our podcast tours is incredible. I don't say that to brag. I say that to show you that this is why we do podcasting and why we teach podcast guesting. A, is because I wanted to do that when I started, but also we get pitched a lot per week. 10 to 20 people per week try to get on our show, and we turn down almost all of them because we're very specific with who we want on. And so in this program, I'm going to show you what we're looking for in a good pitch, but also what we're looking for when we're growing our podcast, what we're looking from the front end. Because if you want to be a good podcast guest, it makes sense for you to dive into the mind of someone running a top 1% podcast and what I'm looking for, what my team are looking for in guests. Because it's not just about, followers or how they can speak. There's a lot in there about knowledge, about authority, about how you can solve a specific problem for our audience. And so when we're looking for guests, it makes sense to me that I would just tell you exactly what I'm looking for so you can become the top guest. Because if you get on our show, for example, or the other 4 million podcasts out there, you're going to get massive exposure. You're going to be able to drive traffic and leads to your business. You can convert those relatively easily. I know a guy here who's got 2 or 3 million YouTube subscribers, and he said he would trade 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, Instagram, or TikTok for one podcast download. That's the value we're talking about here. And so in reality, I really believe that everyone has massive value. We're just blocked by modern societal norms, and we rarely show our full potential. You get that feeling when you're like, I'm at maximum potential here, I'm in the flow state, I'm doing really well. That happens so rarely because we just lack confidence, we lack strategy. This is a free video. I'm going to show you exactly how to do all of this. And I'm really hoping that this video will help you overcome those blockers and get this message of confidence out to the world, the exact message that I wish someone would have shown me when I started my business 3+ years ago. We've helped hundreds of people become top podcast guests and make serious money from their businesses. We've also helped some incredible podcasts to grow. And I want to make sure this video gives you that feeling that you're compelled to then share it with everyone you know. I want to give so much value that you really feel like everyone should be able to use this as a marketing tool. Whether you're a business owner, an entrepreneur, or just an expert or an author, this will work for you. So this is the way to get the most out of this video. Make sure you save this video for a start, because this is your curriculum. You need to be able to come back to this, find the chapters and find the parts that you're not as strong on. If you've got YouTube Premium, you can download it as well. I'd recommend downloading it. Then you've got it, you haven't got to come back to it. In the description below, we've created a full workbook. So you can literally go in there and you can follow along this program, all the different sections we're going to go through. And we've put tools and parts in there that you can literally fill out. I want you to fill this out as you're going along. You can also bookmark this video on any of on your browser, wherever you're watching this. One thing that you really need to do is commit to this program. And something that I was told about a year ago, which I always do now when I do a program, is get your card out, put it on the table and look at your card. Have it there whilst you're watching me. Imagine you have actually spent money on this, because you're much more likely to actually take action. Remember that this video could be taken down at any time. The point here is that if you get the value and you implement it, you will win from this stuff. Make sure you've got something to take notes with, because we're going to do a lot of talking, a lot of teaching in this. And make sure you come back to this video and use it, as I say, as your curriculum. I really want to just quickly as well here, just cover off why podcast guesting. You already clicked on this video, so you're already bought in, you already understand the value, but just to give you a little bit of a taste of why I'm so passionate about this, it's because we're in a trust recession now. People literally do not trust. They've been scammed so many times, they don't trust anyone selling anything anymore. We have to have so much value before we do anything. Google did that survey that I'm sure you're familiar with, We need 7 hours of content from a business, 11 interactions in 4 separate places before we're likely to buy. That is a lot of content, and the amount of content, if you think about it and break it down, if that's a TikTok video, that's 7 to 10 seconds. If that's an Instagram reel, that's 90 seconds. If that's a LinkedIn post, that is 30 seconds to a minute. Imagine if you went on 2 podcasts a month, 1 hour each minimum. That in a few months, you've already got 7 hours of content that someone can find, watch, listen to you, sat alongside someone that's already trusted and has their own audience, which means that you've literally committed to that 7 hours of content. You've built trust immediately already. And you're able to speak in such a way that everyone understands you. They're familiar with you. They're familiar with your hairstyle, how your face looks, how you interact, your speech impediments, or whatever you might have. So it's high trust, long form content. And obviously, as I mentioned, because we've got the rise of AI, which we're going to go through, there's some amazing parts of AI that we can utilize. People are looking for that human connection. You've also got to remember there's a lot of PR with the right audiences. We are not looking to go viral here. We're not looking to build the biggest podcast in the world. In fact, we're talking the other side. We just want to be known to a niche audience of ideal clients. Podcasting is also much easier to then repurpose on LinkedIn, email, and Instagram because you've already put everything in one place. It's the most efficient way. And something that no one is talking about, podcasting has unrivaled SEO benefits. So no one mentions that because people are paying for backlinks, they're paying for blog articles. A good podcast, and you only want to go on the good podcast, and we'll show you how, they will put out a lot of content about you. They will link to you on their website, they'll link to you on blogs, link to you in posts. That's not bad for SEO. So before we get into this, I want to set some expectations. What I'm not promising you here is that you're going to become a millionaire from podcasting. What I'm saying is that podcasting is a game of personal brand. And behind the personal brand, there's a lot. There's authority, there's the ability to speak, there's the ability to put across valid information and value. What I'm saying is that you will, by the end of this, know how to find relevant podcasts. And you will strategize which ones to go on in which order. You'll know exactly how to pitch to podcasts. Like I said, we get 10 to 20 pitches a week. Only very few even make it through to my team because we're looking for something in particular. You'll have nailed your positioning, something that everyone misses out. So people actually want to listen to you. A reminder here, no good podcast host or podcast in general wants another fitness expert or another business guru. We're looking for something in particular. You'll be more confident in what to say, how to control conversations, get your value across without being boring. You're not going to be boring. You're going to be confident and you're going to be inspiring. You'll know how to drive traffic towards your business. You'll know how to drive sales from your podcast, and you'll know how to maximize your exposure. I'm going to tell you all of this in the upcoming modules. So as I say, treat this like a program. Get that workbook downloaded. Save this video and let's get into it. Okay, let's jump into it. Hopefully you've got a method of taking notes now. If you haven't, I'll give you 2 seconds to go and get a notepad or bring up your notes on your phone. So what I want to do before we jump in is to talk about a podcast guesting strategy. Then we're going to jump into a bit about pitching because that's probably the bit that you're most excited about. But the most important part really is understanding the podcast strategy. So being a guest on a podcast is just the start. It really is. There's so much more to all of this. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through in this program some of these P's. So we're going to start here. We're going to start with pitching, but we're going to talk about positioning ourselves for the pitch. We're going to move on to profile, posting, profit, podcasts, and performing. And the reason we're going to do this is because so many people just get on any podcast they can. Maybe you know people doing exactly that. Maybe you've done that yourself. Someone asks you on and you just say yes because it sort of strokes your ego, like I've mentioned a few minutes ago. The difficulty we have when that happens is you lose your clarity. You lose what you're effectively known for. And as soon as we start to lose that, it makes the whole strategy a bit more difficult. So I'd ask you, or I would tell you, I think you should, ask yourself the question, what type of show do you want to be on? So say you're a chiropractor. You should probably go on podcasts about sport, maybe a bit about medicine. There's tons of medical podcasts. Maybe you should go on podcasts that speak to older people about their ailments or just who are focused at people over 50. Whatever that niche is, make sure you find an exact match. A really interesting part here is, remember that if you are a business coach, this is the best example. If you're a business coach, you cannot go on a podcast just to talk about being a business coach. You should not go on just a business podcast, because that doesn't mean anything. You're literally going to go on, talk about your story, and then just give generic business advice. And that's going to happen again and again on the same podcast, which means that audience is going to be massively fatigued of hearing a very similar take. Bearing in mind, we know that in business, a lot of different things work. So you have to have your absolute niche. So I'd ask you to go and go away and make a note now and ask yourself, what type of show should you be on? Really dig deep into this. What kind of show could I go on? What value could I add? To get to that point, you must ask yourself, what do you do? Do you have a coffee shop? Do you sell coffee? Are you a PT? Are you a fitness trainer? Are you a sustainability consultant? Do you have a kids club? Once you understand what you do, then break it down into sort of content pillars. Like, what is the main thing that's interesting about what you do? Because there'll be so many things in what you do that you then need to break that into specific pillars, those 4 pillars. And we'll get to that later on. But it's really important to start to understand those podcasts. Then we know that we want to go on a minimum of 2 hours of podcast per month. That's really good for the SEO. That's really good for you to hone your skills. It's not too much that you're going to overwhelm, even though it's a global audience, overwhelm an audience. Because obviously you're going to want to start sharing this kind of stuff when you're going on these podcasts. You want to help with the marketing. So you've got the 2 podcasts to go on a month. You know that they're going to be specific. I'd also make some sort of template here where you're able to go, these are the kind of podcasts I want to go on. Highlight the ones that you found that are good, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. And then we're going to start pitching for them. That's effectively a very, very simple oversight for the strategy. When you're thinking of these podcasts, just make sure that they are of the caliber that you want to go on. Again, another reason for showing you this sort of symbol here is we need to make sure that we are not over or underconfident in our ability. So say this is the flywheel. This is a flywheel of podcasting. And say you want to get onto Diary of a CEO or Joe Rogan or Modern Wisdom or School of Greatness. Well, there's no way they're going to have you on now. You could be a best-selling author. You could make millions of pounds. Unless you've got a solid framework and proof that you are a great podcast guest, they won't have you on. So you want to start with like top 10% shows. Top 10% shows are going to get 1,000 downloads. They might have an audience, a combined audience with their lists of 10,000 people. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of people that you can get in front of. You then want to work your way up to top 7% shows, top 5% shows, top 1% shows. If we put the ones right at the top of the Rogan, the Stephen Bartlett, the ones I mentioned, as top 0.1% shows, 50 million plus downloads a month, you need to go around this sort of symbol, this sort of flywheel a fair few times. You really need to get onto a decent amount of 10%, a decent amount. When I say a decent amount, probably 10 to 20 at a minimum, 10% shows. Then go to top 8 or top 7% shows, do another 10 or 20. This is going to take at least a year to 18 months of going on these shows before you start to get your nose into the top 1% and above. You need that absolute proof that you are a fantastic guest. And of course, whilst you're doing that, this is why I keep saying this, on that ascension is when you're going to make money. You're going to make money as you go. Then when you get to the bigger shows, the money just becomes faster and easier. So we've got a bit of a strategy and we've sort of got our realistic expectations that we're not going to get onto the massive podcast straight away. We need to really look at this as a long-term organic play. And the more we do, the more value we're going to build on the internet, in the ether of what this effectively is, which is, personal branding and branding in general. So where do we find these podcasts? That's probably your next question. There's loads of ways to find these podcasts. You can use softwares like Podpitch. You can use softwares like Match FM. What I would suggest you do to start with is do your personalized outreach. Personalized outreach lets you define yourself and show how different you are. The softwares that are out there right now are a bit more like a marketplace. So it becomes very, very salesy. You can get onto really good podcasts without needing to use those softwares. So use a website called Listen Notes if you haven't heard of it before. There's also Raphonic. What I would do is look for a podcast. Look for podcasts on Listen Notes. On there, it will tell you what percentage they are in terms of global reach. It will say top 10%, top 5%, top 1%. So you can validate how good these podcasts are. You can also find lists on there. You know, we've got some templates as well, and well, we can give them to you. I'll put them in the description below, along with another couple of things I've got in this part for you, which will be quite helpful. You find the podcasts on there, you validate them on there. By doing that, you've got your strategy, you've also got a number of podcasts that you can go on, and you know they've got a good audience. What we don't want to do is start replying to people who are coming to us, or us going to podcasts that aren't very good. It's just going to waste your time, it's going to get you frustrated. We need to get the strategy right, and then make sure we're going on properly qualified podcasts. And so, to make you the best guest, I thought what would be helpful is for me, as a host of a top 1% podcast, to tell you how we qualify guests. So I've got a team that help me to qualify guests, to make sure that before they even get to me, to even look at the sheets, they've come through a framework. And so the framework really looks through a number of things. It looks through, have they been on podcasts before? What was the reach like? What was their speaking ability like? Have they published for a long time? Are they a published author? Have they published online for a long period of time? What's their following like? Is their following engaged? And we always look here on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a really big part of this, and it's something you should really think of. The reason we do that is because you can't, at the moment, it's very difficult to fake LinkedIn. So if you look at the big people in the world who you want as top guests, they're going to have big LinkedIn followings, as well as Instagram and YouTube, whatever. But the point is, LinkedIn is a very good one for B2B and actually B2C thought leaders and personal brands. Make sure you've got your LinkedIn up to scratch. I'll give you something for this as well. The other thing that we really like, and we get, like I said in the intro, we get 10 to 20 pitches a week, and we really like what we call a one sheet. It's effectively a resume for podcasting. And I thought here would be a good idea just to show you mine. So this is one that I have for myself. This is how I go on 2 to 4 podcasts a month. And so what we have here is really simple, clear picture of me, with name obviously, what I do, and then an about section. The about section should be written in that sort of story format. So why should you listen to me? Well, I've helped founders scale to multi-6-7 figures by turning podcast guest appearances into revenue-driving assets. Host of a top 1% podcast, interviewed heavy hitters like Dan Henry, Lauren Tickner, Shan Hanif, and so on. Really short, really sharp. Straight away, there's a reason that you might want to have me on your podcast. Underneath here, we've got a bit about the business as well, but very short, because most people think that their business story is more interesting than it actually is. I have multiple origin stories that are quite good that I've spoken about on stage and in different places. They're not all relevant right now. This is a one-pager. This is really short and sharp. We've also got suggested episode titles. So this one I think is really, really revolutionary. Out of the 105 plus guests we've had, they're all brilliant. Only about 8 or 9% have given us a suggested angle or topic. And funnily enough, they are the best ones. The ones who've made the most money, have the most followers, have the most standing in the business community, which is the kind of guest that we have on. They come to you and go, this is the angle that I think we should speak about on your podcast. This is what I can say. The reason that's clever is because they know that when we start doing our research, we're going to angle it towards that. So they can angle their own research. Really, really, really important. You've also got a bit here around who you've worked with. Always include a list or a Spotify playlist or a YouTube playlist of all the podcasts that you have been on. We also, with some of our clients, we also speak about recording yourself a video. So if there's not a lot of videos of you speaking online, record a 5-minute video, maybe 3 to 5 minutes of you speaking, so that people can see that you can speak well. They can see that you're capable of talking to a camera and you're not going to get a bit nervous when the red lights come on. Which is, believe it or not, something we've had where there's 3 to 5 cameras in a room, there's 5 to 10 people in the room producing the podcast, the red lights come on, people completely go back into their shell, which we'll also overcome in this program because there's tricks to that. But this is a good one. Put all the podcasts that you've been on onto a Spotify playlist. And then we've got key takeaways here. Make sure you've got some key takeaways that the podcast can take and give to their audience. Really important that we remember here that when you pitch, you have to remember you are pitching to their audience. It doesn't necessarily make sense to talk to the host and say, this is why I'd be a great guest. It's better to talk to their audience, say this is the value that I can give. So this is our one-pager template. And actually, I'll put this in the description below. You can download this exact template in the description below, and I've also put in there the other parts that I just mentioned. That I'll go back and add them to make sure you've got them. So we've got some email templates that are proven, that what the best ones that have been sent to us, we've effectively put them into a template for you. So you've got done for you templates to email out to podcasts. And you've also got a perfect one pager. This is the perfect one pager that we use and all of our clients use to get on, hundreds of podcasts per year. Cool, okay. So now we've looked at this. Also at the bottom, that's worth mentioning that you've got the phone number, you've got the business, you've got the LinkedIn account. Again, remember that LinkedIn is a really important one. So when we're doing emails, when we're trying to get onto podcasts, it's really, really important to make sure we stand out. And so we want to talk about the anatomy of a perfect email pitch. This is what's in the description below for you as well. Some of these ones that we've had from people that have been really good, because the majority of them blend in. They are so boring. And you just look at it and go, I'm not gonna even open this email. There's no way this person's coming on. Because they can't make themselves look appealing. They can't solve an initial problem. So there's 3 different ones we want to talk about. The topical angle. So like here, you could put in here a really topical angle to a host. You could say this, there's a rise of AI happening. I've worked in AI at Google, whatever it might be. I've built an AI company. I think I could have a really good debate with you about why AI is going to take over the world. Topical angle. You could also do the same if you're looking at, if you look at the glucose goddess on Instagram, I think, she effectively found the topic that glucose was aging people too fast. And if we decrease or control our glucose intake, that's a massive win for humanity. That was her angle. She took it just as everyone was going through the diet phase of COVID, effectively, when everyone was doing air frying and that kind of thing. She ran with that, and she managed to go on so many podcasts and build a massive media following. That's a really good one to do. The second one would be mutual win. So if you can pitch in your template like this, and there's templates that we've got for you as well, remember to use the templates. They're much easier than doing it yourself. The mutual win is I will win if you will win. So I have a big audience, you have a big audience. Let's swap, leverage each other's. It's a mutual win. We can also add value whilst we're doing that. You obviously need to have value there. If you haven't got a big audience, but maybe you do a mastermind, or maybe you've got access to people, you can say, if I come on, I can talk about this, I can introduce you to that person. Think of the mutual win. When we're pitching to a podcast, remember that you are not the end goal. You winning is not the end goal. Like I said, the audience must be the winners. But with this one, everyone can win. The podcast host, you, and the audience. Remember that when you're writing these emails. And the third one is the story path. So if you have a genuinely super interesting story, tell part of that story. Later on in this program, we're going to talk about story arcs and epiphanies when you're answering questions. What's interesting here is that you can use those story paths in this part here, right? You literally tell that story. So I could have told my story about, following the conveyor belt of university, master's degree, corporate job 2, having a car crash, selling everything, starting a business, moving half around the world. I could do that if I think the podcast host or the podcast that I'm going on, or even the audience would benefit from it. This one is almost set up as one of the examples that we've given you for a business podcast. So I want to go on a business podcast. They're looking for big businesses or cool businesses or people looking at new trends. This is the podcast way of doing it, as in I'm talking about being a podcast guest. If I wanted to go on one about, society or communities or modern living, even maybe a health one, I would change this and make it bespoke. And I would use my story path, one of my stories, to make that email and to make this one pager stand out. Remember that you want the email to be in the subject, in the copy, and in the one pager, all to link. We need them all to link to make sense. So a subject could be like, I've not even got any examples because the examples are in the description. The examples are in the download in the description below as well. There's some great ones in there. So I'm not even going to do it off the top of my head. You can look at the ones below. Cool. Okay, so now we understand how to use cold emails, how to find podcasts, how to strategize. Let's have a little look at pitch mistakes. So some of the pitch mistakes that we get, and like I say, our podcast manager gets 10 to 20 per week on average. The pitch mistakes are people forget, like I've said a million times, they forget that it's actually about the audience. Number two is they forget that podcasting is effectively a personal branding competition. So yes, it's about the audience, but if you haven't got much value to give, i.e. you're very good at what you do, but you're not able to show that because you haven't published content before, you haven't got a profile set up on social medias, you haven't got a personal website, you haven't got a book, if you haven't got enough stuff to prove what you've done, how is anyone going to validate? And that's the key word, validate, that you know what you're talking about. This is why this is really important. You know, previous podcasts. You could even just, if you haven't been on podcasts, we say to people that are doing this for the first time, just record yourself speaking, like I said, because then at least we can see, we can validate. We've had some clients that English is their second language. It's more important, again, to show yourself speaking, because then you can get an idea of the accents and you can get an idea of how it will go down with an audio first, primarily, media form. So those two are really, really important. The third one is to not be overbearing. Really don't be overbearing when you're pitching to podcasts. Remember that you still have value. There's 4 million podcasts, you know, about 1 million of those are active, 400,000 are posting at least once a week. So there's enough out there. You don't need to be super desperate. If you come across super desperate, and by that I mean too many follow-ups or massive amounts of text in your emails, or you're bombarding them across lots of different campaigns, different platforms, you're just going to completely turn someone off. And then, okay, the last one there, the fourth one I think that is suggested titles. Just be careful to do your research on the audience. So the best guest that we've had for this, actually mentioned her in here, is Lauren Tickner. She, the research that she did to be a guest on our podcast was incredible. She knew who our audience is, where they're based, what they're looking for, you know, what we've done in our lives. So they could link to everything. She'd even talk about her business to then link it to my journey. She made sure that what she said benefited me as the host. And the reason you do that is because, remember, this is about the audience. And when you've got a podcast, that audience is loyal to the host. So you need to give value to the audience, but remember to link to the host. So with all of this, the research, and I'm going to make this point again later when I'm showing you how we prep for a podcast and how it benefits you as a guest. Make sure that part you're doing, the research on the intros, is super valuable. Cool. Another part there. Yeah, remember the winner. It must be the audience, and to write a killer hook and guest bio. So this part here, really, really important. Again, in the description below, there is a number of email templates, some AI prompts to help you get this done quicker, because obviously you want to iterate this quickly again and again and again to make sure it's working for you. This part is really, really, really valuable. Let's move on to the next bit. So before you start doing any pitching, let me take you through the most important part that you probably avoided in the past. And the reason I put pitching at the front of this program is because it's the part that people want to start. They want to start taking action, which is absolutely brilliant. But it's really important that we get the positioning right. Because if the positioning is not correct, no one's going to respond to your pitching. Which is why I did make sure that you understood that in the first part. And I hope you understand that, and now we're going to solve that. So, to nail your positioning, what we need to do is think about a niche and an angle. And bear with me here if you've already done this work, if you've already got a business or you're an author, whatever it is, if you're a thought leader and you've already really nailed this. But I just want you to go over this one more time with the specific mindset of this is for podcasts. This is so I can go onto an audience and have 10, 20,000 people listen to me and they understand exactly what I do and how I can help them. So what makes you worth listening to? That's effectively the question we're going to answer in this section. So the simple framework we need to remember is I help who, do what, by how. So who do you help, what do you do, and how? It's the same thing you put on your profiles, right? Or in any bio you might have. But it's a lot more interesting or difficult to ascertain what you're going to actually say when you're on a podcast and they're going to speak for an hour. You're going to speak for an hour because that's a long time and you're going to be guided by the host unless you have some different strategies, which we'll get onto later. But you probably are going to be guided by what they're doing and their angle, unless you've really stipulated in your one page of what you want to talk about. So, what are podcast hosts and teams looking for in a guest? Well, we are certainly looking for someone who knows their stuff, someone who is able to speak on a niche within a niche. We've touched on that before. So hopefully you've got some ideas of what you would speak about. Hopefully you've got some ideas about, the different angles you might take, your hot takes, your controversial or contrarian opinions. Those are the things that as podcasts we want to talk about. So I've written a few down here. So things like, if you're a social media business, what's the take you've got? You could say social media is not going to be here in 10 years' time. Genuinely, that could be your take. That's going to get you on a lot of podcasts. And you could then leverage that to say, that's why it's even more important to get it nailed in the next 10 years, because then it's going to be gone. So the investment opportunity is now. You could also say that, something like Threads or Twitter is where all the money is being made. There's so many angles in the social media industry. But the point is, social media is already a niche, or you could even go bigger. Media, marketing is a niche. Social media is a niche of that. Go really into one area. You could go into LinkedIn, you could go into Twitter, whatever it might be. What I would say is by going into that one thing, it shows you have credibility and it shows you've thought deeply about an area. If you're a relationship expert, for example, could you talk about, what is the truth about happy marriages that no one believes? What's a misconception about long marriages? That's something that's quite interesting. Relationships is already quite niche. You're going to get a specific kind of audience listening to that kind of episode. But then within that, what's interesting? Could you talk about, a specific cultural difference that we get when we have, relationships? Could you talk about divorce? Could you talk about how children are affected by your behavior? What is a hot take? What's something that's really interesting that's going to get you noticed? Because of course, once you get onto the podcast, someone's going to have to fill an hour or 2 hours with you. They're going to not be able to go down one tiny avenue for the whole time. You will get the rest of your chance to put the thought leadership out there. But you've got to be known for the one thing. Really, really important. Another example, if you're a trader, right? If you're a day trader, if you're a stocks and shares trader, maybe you're a coach of traders. You could take the angle of why leaving your day job is a completely terrible idea. It's a bad idea. When all anyone wants to hear is day trading or stocks and shares trading or Forex trading can get you out of your job. You can make, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month and leave your job in 2 months' time. That's what everyone's saying. Why don't you say the opposite? Say do not leave your job. That's a generic take. You could go really deep into trading and say there's no point in starting trading unless you've got $500,000 to play with. Again, podcasts are going to take you up on that because they want something different. You think about how often people put podcasts out. The cadence of a podcast is usually one a week, maybe one every 2 weeks. The big podcasts are doing 2 or 3 per week. So to find people of high quality is quite difficult, which is why we're doing this in the first place. We've all got the ability to become high quality, in-demand podcast guests if we get this part right. And to get ahead of everyone else that's trying to do this, you've got to find your take that is going to get you into the right place. And then position yourself on the back end so that people trust you. For example, a bad example would be, if I myself started speaking about how to trade gold. I'm not a trader. I don't know anything about how to buy and sell gold. So if I went onto a podcast and did that, it would make no sense. A better example would be if I went onto a podcast and started speaking about why you should become a podcast guest and why it's a massive opportunity in between 2025 and the next 10, 15 years. And my business sold cars. Again, makes absolutely no sense. So I found my niche within a niche, but my positioning's wrong. Remember in the previous part of this program, we spoke about why when you're pitching, your subject, your copy, and your one-pager email need to all be super aligned. Because this is effectively like trying to get a job right. We're trying to get media and effectively trying to get media for free. If you try and get onto TV or national press or papers, they're going to charge you for these opportunities. Podcasting is owned media and you've got the ability to get on if you just show your worth. So we need to make sure that our whole paper trail, media trail, makes sense. And again, it's really important here to remember that positioning trumps popularity. So the person who is really well known in their niche for one thing, maybe has 5, 10, 15,000 followers, is going to make a lot more money than someone who has 1 million followers, but they're very generic. They're like an influencer. They've sort of forgotten how to make themselves positioned or forgotten to position themselves. So we don't want virality. We want authority. I know a number of people here in Dubai who have got 1 million plus followers and they can't make any money out of it because they're just known for being the guy who has the lifestyle. What can I buy from that? Can you explain how you got there? Not really. It was a number of different decisions I made. Okay, so how do you monetize that? Can't really. The best way to do this is to understand that if your positioning is right, it beats popularity every day of the week. I had a guy on my podcast recently. He had over 1.5 million subscribers on YouTube on one channel. He's got 30,000 on the other channel. The channel with 30,000 followers teaches you how to grow on YouTube. He makes more money from that channel than he does on the channel with 1.5 million subscribers, because the positioning is so much more specific there. That's, I think, a great example. So, finding your positioning or finding your one clear problem for one specific person. The biggest bit of advice I can give you here is to name that person. So when we're looking at guests, for example, I know, this is from the other side, that my listener could be called James. James listens to my podcast every week. He has listened for the last 2 years. He's got a business. He's based in the US. He makes between $500,000 and $5 million a year. He's into fitness. He's into personal development. And that is who I speak to. That is who my content goes to. Therefore, when my guest comes on, one of the clarification points of our framework is, do they speak to James? Would James like them? Would James say, oh, great guest. Yeah, I really like that person. You need to do the exact same thing when you're doing your positioning. Can you name the person that you speak to in all of your content and in all of the things that you then speak about on podcasts? Name that person. And I suggest you write this down. Write this down, write everything about them and speak only to them. Maybe they're called, maybe you're a relationship coach like we mentioned, and your ideal client's called Janet. She's 55, she's been divorced once, she's remarried, she's got 3 kids. She has a £25,000 hatchback car. She lives in London. She's a finance head in a big corporate, and she has these issues. Then every time you go on a podcast and you pitch, would Janet want to listen to this? Has Janet listened to this before? Can I change this slightly based on feedback? That's how you get your positioning right, because Janet only wants to come to you, or James only wants to come to me. And you'll be so surprised at how this draws in a bigger audience than just saying, I speak about business because I have made £1 million in the last year. No one cares, because everyone understands that there's so many ways to get from A to B. They want to listen to the niche, the secret. We're all looking for secrets in order to jump the gun or get ahead. So think about a niche within a niche. Okay, so if you think about Stephen Bartlett, that he's the host of the Diary of a CEO podcast. He had a public speaking guest came on. He had lots of followers. He's a great public speaker. He teaches public speaking. If he would have told us as the audience everything we needed to know about public speaking, I can guarantee you would not have been interested. I guarantee you would have not told your partner about anything that he'd said. But if he spoke about stuttering when you're nervous, or struggling to get your words out when you're nervous, he will appeal to the 30% of people listening to that podcast who go, whenever I have to do a presentation at work, or whenever I have to pitch for my business, or whenever I go on a podcast, I stutter. I can't get my words out, I stutter. They will go closer to that guest. They will follow him. They will download anything he has. They'll consume content. And as we know, as they tick up towards 7 hours of content, they're becoming more and more likely to buy from him at some point in time. Really important to have that in your mind. And the problem we often see is people are normally, as a guest, they are either overconfident in themselves and they think they're a brilliant guest, or they are underconfident. Both of them are dangerous. An overconfident person will speak too long, they'll speak quickly, they speak from a place of authority, which the audience won't like. Or depends on your audience, but they normally won't like it. Or someone who's underconfident isn't able to articulate. They don't think they're worthy of having this opportunity, and therefore they're also difficult to listen to. You're not sure if you should trust them. Makes the whole thing difficult, and then the positioning off the back of that is going to be wrong. Both of them have positioned themselves completely differently. That's also worth thinking of as well. So if you position yourself as someone with absolute confidence, and then online or in your profiles you come across a bit different, people don't like that either. They want the link to be very, very clear. And so we want authority anchors, right? We want to anchor ourselves to authority at every single time. We can do that by thinking about the person we're speaking to, the James, the Janets of the world. So we want credibility without overcompensating effectively. So what I would always say is try not to name drop. Try not to drop massive things. And we had a podcast guest recently who came through our program, and he showed us some of the previous podcasts he'd been on. And the host would always say something like, to start the podcast, tell us a bit about yourself, which I hate as a starting question, by the way, but they would ask that question. And he would just give the whole answer. I started when I was 10, really difficult childhood, grew up, made $1 million, I've got a Ferrari, I now live in Bali. Told the whole story. So where does the host go from there? Are they overcompensating? They're name dropping different celebrities they know. There's not a single angle to go from. There's literally 100 questions that you could ask, but the angle is not very clear. So you don't want to name drop, you don't want to overcompensate. Add authority by stacking your experience, The best way I think about this is whenever I go on a podcast and someone wants to speak to me about podcast guesting or about using AI to get more exposure, I could very quickly just start to give them tools, start to give them things they could do. I could talk about people we've worked with or my own podcast, people I've met. And I often think, and we'll get into this in the next sections, we speak in philosophies, in strategies and in tactics. Tactics are like what you actually do. So, you want to write a hook like this. That's a tactic. A strategy was like, you need hooks. Philosophy is, it's really important to engage the audience in the first, 3 seconds to keep their engagement. And by doing that, you sort of can then refine and cross-section how you come across. You can stop yourself from overcompensating. You can stop yourself from name dropping because you're like, is this relevant? Is this a philosophy? Is this a strategy? What have they asked me? Have they asked me to give them a direct tactic? If so, I'm probably not going to give it anyway because there's no value in that. If I told people on a podcast exactly how to do everything, they wouldn't do it. Hopefully you're listening to this and you're taking action. I'm giving you tactics and strategies, but I'm also trying to overlay philosophies in here because that's what resonates with you more deeply, right? So it's really important to remember no one has the experience you have. No one's got the stories that you have. So that's your leverage. When you've got the positioning, that's your leverage. So remember the podcast one-pager template I gave you in the last section. All of this work we're doing here will make filling out that 10 times easier, and it will make the research and the emails 10 times easier, and actually you're going to become 10 times more likely to get a response from podcasts because we've seen this all the time. We have a very specific framework that we even let people get to our team, and then once the team get it, they then look at, do they fill in or fit the criteria that we want as top guests? And so what I thought I would do is help you a bit further here, which is why I've had the iPad in my hand for the last 5 or 10 minutes. I want to draw out a sort of cheat sheet for you, and I'm going to show you exactly what I would fill out in order to get to the crux of this as fast as possible. So if I start drawing on here, you'll have to apologize for this. The first thing I want to do is put in the middle, I want to put in there, what's your 5-year mission? So I'll draw that out there. Really important to understand your 5-year mission. And by that I mean, where do you see yourself in 5 years? What's the point in all of this? Because it'd be it's very easy to jump on a trend. If you think podcasting is just a trend for you, if you don't think that it's going to include copywriting, confidence, speaking, networking, it includes everything. But if you see it as a fad and you don't align it to your 5-year mission, the whole thing's going to go down the drain and your positioning is going to be wrong and you're going to see it as a very short win. Not what we want at all. On the left here, I'm going to put, what do we want to be known for? Sorry, the left, yeah. Because again, what am I known for? This is a really interesting one. And again, super important. If you are known for the wrong thing, this entire process becomes almost irrelevant. One of the best ways to think about this is if I put you on a stage in front of 5,000 people, what would you talk about? Because I guarantee you'll think differently if I put you on that stage. If you are that relationship expert, are you really going to get up there and talk about relationships in general? Or are you going to go super niche to be very clear and be very direct? And therefore we will know exactly what you talk about. I talked about the glucose goddess, right? I saw her speak in Dubai. She got on the stage and she spoke about how the timing of your glucose is what causes us to glycate and then age. Super niche within a niche. But it made us all go, okay, maybe I'm eating glucose in the wrong order. And that's what she then became known for. then you look at her content, you look at what she sells, it all aligns perfectly. So what she's known for is perfect. What do you want to be known for? Can't be generic, can't be business, can't be marketing, can't be trading, can't be relationships. What part is it? This is a stretcher question that I put on the right. By that I just mean slightly more difficult to answer if you haven't thought about this yet. But what is your book about? And I will ask you here, if you've already got a book, answer it again. Think about the next book. You know, I've got lots of friends here who are writing books at the minute. They try and do a book every 3 years as a sort of marketing campaign piece. And a lot changes in that time. So if you haven't, let's think about this as you haven't got a book. A book is, 200 to 500 pages of pure thought leadership and storytelling. So by thinking about what is your book going to be about, you're literally looking into the future. You're answering that 5-year mission. You're probably already on the what am I known for section. Where do you think you're going over the next 3 to 5 years? This is evergreen information as well. If you can answer the book question, it's going to really help you with the podcast question. The next one I want to put up in this bubble on the top, on the right, is what experience? What's my most interesting experience? And when I say this one, I would ask you to think in 2 veins. It's not going to fit in the box, is it? It's okay. There we go, make it smaller. Think about this in two veins. There's one side of this that could be my corporate experience. What have I actually done that's valid and interesting and relevant to my audience? What's my most interesting experiences? So, for example, I've worked on £1 billion or dollar merger and acquisition deals. I've interviewed more than $3 billion worth of guests. I lifted up my life and moved 4,000 miles away with no audience, no money, no network, and started from scratch. These are interesting experiences. They're kind of on the business side. I'd also think about lifestyle, not lifestyle effectively, life, just life, I guess, best way of saying it. How many countries have you been to? Have you had any accidents when you were skiing or whatever? Have you tried some of the best sushi in the world? Have you had kids? What experience have you had that resonate with others but are also interesting? When I say interesting, I just mean stand you apart. There's a lot of humans on this planet, and I want you to dig into what is your most interesting experiences on both sides, the life side and the sort of professional side, if you will. Okay, cool. Let's have a look at what we should do next. Let's get this next circle drawn in here. What else do I want to put in here? I think what do you sell needs to be in there. And I'd do in this one, I'd make this one quite high level, right? Because this is going to change, especially because we're trying to zoom out. I'm trying to create a sort of bubble in front of you here so you can see everything in one go. So what do you sell? So don't say I sell retainer-based consulting. Maybe the answer here is what's the problem you're solving? What's the problem you would like to solve? Because if we've got the 5-year mission, what am I known for? What is your book about? What's the most interesting experience? What do you sell? What problem are you solving? We're starting to get a really good picture of who you are and why you're different. So let's put that one in there. What do you sell? What's the problem you're solving? Okay, cool. Keep this bubble effect going. Let's have a look at something else that I think is really important, is like, what's your long game? Right? You could also, I'm also going to put this in the same box, is vision. Right? So we've got a mission. What's the vision? Your long game. So again, I would answer this in 2 ways. The first way is, where do you see yourself in, at least 10, 15 years? Zoom out as far, depending on your age, zoom out as far as you want to zoom. If I've just turned 30, So I would zoom out in 25 years. Where do I want to be in 25 years? What's my long game? What's important to me? My family, my business, my kids in the future. They are the long game. It's less important, unfortunately, about what my dog right now, my 5-year-old Labrador. It's less important to include him in these kind of goal settings. Unlikely he's going to be here in 25 years, although we can keep our fingers crossed. So try and put things in here. What's your long game? What's your vision? It can be aligned to that, right? So if you believe that the work you are doing now is completely aligned to what you want to have an impact on the world by doing, put that in there as well. So if you run someone here, and I know a good friend of mine, he's got a martial arts company. He helps young children between the ages of sort of 3 and 18 to build character through martial arts. His long game is he's got a charity he's started alongside it, where for every student he has who pays, he has someone in a less developed country, lots of countries in Africa, India, Nepal, sponsored for free. They get the same level of education as the people paying, but for free. They're learning martial arts, they're building their characters. His long-term vision is aligned with his values of his family. He wants his family to be looked after, safe, and hopefully financially free. And he wants his business to be able to support people who are less fortunate than him and the people that he teaches in Dubai and in the UK and in the US. Try and align all of these things together. I'd also put a box in here for your origin. And it's a bigger one because this would be hard. This is often quite hard. So your origin story. Okay, so where did you come from? Go back as far as you can. I usually tell 2 or 3 origin stories. I have one from when I'm 5 years old. I have one from when I was in a car crash at 26, 27. These all work together and I can pick and choose. I've got ones from when I started getting pushed towards university, age 16, 17, 18. I've got 3 different versions. So where did you come from? Why do you do what you do now? How did you get to that gap? Fill that gap in for me. What's the youngest iteration of yourself that led you towards this path of who you are today? That's what the origin story should be. And then finally, the last box I want you to fill out, I'll put it on the right here. I want you to list out 3 of your highest values. This will keep us aligned on this journey. You can do more than 3, but if your 3 values are things like trust, authenticity, honesty, integrity, put them in here. Just get a reminder in here of how we're positioning ourselves, so that when we get chased along these different marketing routes of trying to overcompensate, we look back at these values and go, this is who I am, this is my origin story, this is my 5-year mission, this is my long game, this is why I'm doing this. So we come back into the reality of why we're here. And so let me just finish by telling you this sort of bit in this section. I don't want to be talking about podcasts all the time. Because if I go on podcasts and talk about podcasts, it becomes very tiring, right? I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself to be a top guest every time. And people are going to eventually get bored of that. So I have my own pillars that I talk about. I talk about AI. I talk about AI in content, AI in trust. I talk about podcasting. I talk about my life and my lifestyle, why I'm free and why I've built this life of freedom. I need to show that I'm good at the fundamental skills around podcasting. I need to show that I have confidence in front of camera. I have a good, solid network. I have the ability to pitch myself, the ability to speak, the ability to control story arcs, the ability to speak in epiphanies, but also to have a profile that shows my personality, shows my professionalism, and is able to, like I say, show the fundamentals of what I do. So by filling this out, what I hope will happen is you are able to show and have it all written down, the fundamentals of how you are as a professional, but also how you are as a person. And this will help you in the next stages when we go to look at how to perform on a podcast, to just anchor you to where you're going and why we're doing this entire thing. Cool. I think that's enough for this section. Let's jump into the next bits and get more into the strategy of how we're going to make podcasting really, really valuable to us as a marketing channel. Okay, welcome to this section. This is probably my favorite section. This is what's going to stand you out as a top podcast guest and help you get onto those bigger and bigger shows. This is the part that most people are ignoring. They think we'll just get on podcasts and it'll all be okay. We're going to talk about the performing as a top podcast guest. And I think the best way to show you this, or to get this into your mind, is to show you how I, as a top 1% podcast host, prepare for my guest, and how my team, my top 1% podcast team, prepares. Once you understand what we're doing on our side, it then helps you to be prepared to perform on your side as the guest. So, firstly, I thought I'd show you this. So this is a research pack that I get every time we have a podcast guest coming on. This one's for Dan Henry, who we had recently. He's a really well-known coach in the US. A marketing and business coach and funnel builder. And what we have here effectively is all the research on him. We then have a number of questions and story arcs, because someone like that, you know roughly what they're going to say. We've done enough research, and I'll show you in a second, on this kind of person. So we know roughly what they're going to say. We are then able to, if you see here, we're able to have what we think they're going to say down this side, and then the potential story arcs down this side. What that means is that when someone speaks, we can control the conversation. That's cool, because as a podcast host, I want to be able to control the conversation. But it also means that if I want to change the angle slightly, if I want to move on or stay on a topic that I thought was really relevant, I've got enough research in front of me and enough knowledge behind the scenes. Obviously, I've memorized almost all of this beforehand to make sure that I have the control of the story arc. So, how do we start doing the research? How does the team put this together for me? How do we put the story arc together to then build out some questions? We don't write the questions down because I think that can make it false, but obviously in your mind, you've got a few angles you want to go down. So we start by doing really deep research into their background. We actually use AI for this. We have custom AI that helps us do a really big deep dive. So we're going to look at things like their childhood, their schooling, their culture, their upbringing, and their early career. All of these will bring up really interesting themes and stories, but also values that we can then bring throughout the entire podcast, depending on what the angle is going to be. Depending on how good you are as a guest, you also, like I said before, you might want to suggest angles in your one pager. By doing that, you're then controlling part of the conversation. You're controlling what you might be able to do with your repurposing and your profiting later on. But also as a performance, you know that you're going to be able to drive this towards a certain part or a certain direction. So once we've got all that information, we're then going to start to look and start to build on that with their achievements. So we want to see where they found value in their lives. Maybe they built a really big business. Maybe they went to the Olympics. Maybe they've just got an incredible family that they're really, really proud of. Whatever the reason that's qualified them to be a guest, we're going to find that in the achievements section. This helps us to get really early wins with the audience. So what we don't want to do as a podcast host and podcast in general is to come across as we're attacking an audience, a podcast guest. No one's trying to do that. We're just trying to make sure that we're getting enough angles that it's an interesting conversation. And by sharing early wins, giving people a background of where they've come from, where this guest has come from, we're able to build up familiarity. So you as a guest, you could be planning into this. Okay, these are some stories I'm going to feed out into the world so that when people do research with AI or manually, they know this is my background. They know this is where I've come from. They know these are my achievements. They're not just looking at your audience and your relevant thought leadership now. We're looking at your entire story. This is why I keep saying that podcasting is effectively a game of who's winning the personal branding war. Because if you've got enough personal branding and a story to back it up, and hopefully a good amount of expertise and something interesting and relevant for now, you're going to go very far. So we want to get early wins in. We want to show how people have won. Bearing in mind, you may not think that you've got wins, but there'll be things in there that you have overcome or you have done that are brilliant things to bring forward and present in a number of ways to a podcast research team. Very rare that a podcast research team would actually go to the guest and say, can you give us some information? If they do that, I would suggest you don't go on that podcast, because it's probably going to mean they're not going to do that much in-depth stuff. They're just thinking about it for themselves, not for their audience or you. So once we've got the early wins and the achievements, we then look at the peaks and troughs they may have had through their life. The reason we do this is to pull out key themes. So for example, if you look at our podcast, We had a guy called Jeremy Harbour on, who he's a very, very wealthy man, worth hundreds of millions. He's in the M&A, merger and acquisition industry, buys and sells businesses. All the podcast research we had done showed that we could talk about how to buy and sell businesses, how being an entrepreneur shouldn't be from 0 to 1 million. It should be buying a business at 10 million, making it into 12 million, selling it on, that kind of thing. That was very interesting to our audience. However, the research uncovered that actually he lost his brother at the age of, he was 10, his brother was 14, and that changed his perception of life completely. His understanding of mortality terrified him into wanting to be a high achiever. And so those are key themes that then created this conversation about how someone's done so well in their life, even though they've had trials and tribulations. Creates more familiarity, creates bumps. When you watch a good film or a good TV show, what's actually happening is they're bumping your emotions. And some people like action films, lots of bumps. Some people like crime, slow burners, where it's a very gradual incline in emotion to a bump at the end when you find out who the murderer was. That depends on your prerogative, but this is the kind of thing we're looking for. We're looking for the interesting parts of their life. Because once we've got that, once we've got an understanding of them, their background, their achievements, tough things they've gone through, only then does it become important to look at what their current value is and how they can bring that to the episode. So let's use Jeremy Harbour as that example. His background story was really interesting. What he does is really interesting. What he sells now is effectively he helps people to then buy and sell businesses. He gives that knowledge away. Super relevant to his entire story, but also super relevant to the world, right? We know that, baby boomers are retiring, selling their businesses. In the next 5 years, tens of thousands of businesses are going to be sold while people try and retire. So it's an absolutely gold mine of a trend, and something we really wanted to talk about. But I would argue, and I genuinely believe this, having done so many episodes and helped so many people do this, if that story hadn't come out, it would have been another guy talking about another kind of way to do business. The story and the familiarity and the ability to trust and know and like this person was what made that podcast episode do so well. And so that's what we're looking for. All of this stuff, hopefully you can be writing notes now going, what are my achievements? What are my peaks and troughs? How does my value add to the current trends, or how can I piggyback a current trend? Because whatever the guest's current takes and expertise are, we have to take that and we have to understand and see how that is going to benefit our audience. Because if I bring someone on who's very well known or very rich and they're not a good guest, they don't add any value, my audience is going to stop trusting me, right? And so this is almost how this sort of industry for me and this passion came about, because we've had multimillionaires on our podcast where we've had to say to them afterwards, we're not going to put that episode out because it was a bit stop-start. You didn't give us any value. You didn't try and help our audience. There was nothing to it. There was no substance. And we've had people that have come and literally told incredible stories and given so much away for free that they've made tens of thousands of dollars off the back of it. And this is why I think it's important for you to understand that the performance is crucial, but the precursor, giving enough content and creating this content flywheel of information about you and your expertise and your stories and your background just helps everyone to trust you more. Cool, okay. So we've got a little bit into this now, talking about the performance. This is what we're looking for as a podcast team still. So we're also then thinking about how you're going to contradict, you as a guest, you're going to contradict or affect previous or future potential guests. Because we've got a duty to make sure our guests share fair and factual information. I genuinely believe this. Podcasters around the world are starting to get into a lot of trouble from letting people just talk, give information, ask seemingly lazy and non-thought-provoking questions, and someone gets in front of 10, 20,000 people in a podcast episode at minimum, and no one's fact-checked if they've done the right thing. That's one element. The second part is, what about if you as a guest come on and you say something that fundamentally contradicts something that the last guest said, or someone that we might have on in 2 or 3 months' time? It's not necessarily a bad thing for you, but as a podcast business, we're looking to make sure that we have interesting and succinct conversations. I don't want one person to agree, one person to disagree, one person to agree, one person to disagree on whatever the common theme is. Then the audience goes, well, should I listen? Should I not? Should I listen? Should I not? There's too much going on for them. We need to be able to give value and be seemingly consistent. So that's something for you to be thinking about when you're planning all of this, planning all of this out. Yes, you want to be contradictory, you want to be contrarian, but you also need to make sure that you're not going to jar someone so badly that, yeah, you might go a bit viral on some of your reels, but in fact, you're not going to get invited anywhere else because it upset the audience too much. Remember, again, this is all about helping and giving value to an audience. So as part of all of this, when we get to all this information, we'll then also be able to find the angle that we want to go down and build hooks and story arcs that we want to use to make sure we get engaging content, because we need to make sure that people are actually going to see this stuff. So you could have given us an angle, we're going to see your background, your troughs, everything. And then we will have an angle that we think is interesting based probably on what previous guests have spoken about and what future guests have spoken about. We tend to link our guests together in some way. So if someone's just spoken about, funnels and they spoke about how important sales are, the next person might be a sales expert. The next person after that could be a person who's built sales teams. So it all links together. Maybe that's a bit of an obvious part, but it's actually more important than you think. What could your talking points link to in terms of another guest, right? So from there, we then have a format for putting the research together so we can control the interview in a rough sense to get what we need from it. All that information I've just told you about, we put that all together into this research pack that then creates the story arcs. If you don't know what a story arc is, effectively it's how we control the bump, right? So what does it mean for you? I'll break some of these parts down because I think it's better just to speak through it. So in fact, I'll leave it there a second and I'll come back to story arcs. So you need to have relevant stories, okay? Think about the amount of stories you've got. You've probably got a ton of experience. You don't want to just tell random stories or anecdotes. It's going to be really boring. You need to have strategic stories, which could be about how you became whatever you are, an expert in this. Could be about how you fell into doing this. Could be about how you failed in the past and you've come back up. Every single story needs to be packaged and prepared so that you don't just go, oh, I'll tell you about this time this happened. You need to have already prepared it. We need to set up, tension, resolution, takeaway, okay? That is effectively a story arc. So all of your stories need a setup, they need to build tension, there needs to be a resolution and a takeaway. That's what you do as a guest with your stories. As a host in our research pack, what I'd stop myself from saying a second ago is we also do the same thing. So we have a setup, maybe it's your background story, especially if it's your first time on our podcast, we would always have a setup. So what's your background? Put a bit of tension in there. How was it difficult? What did you learn? Where did you fail? Then there's gonna be a resolution. So hopefully you've won somewhere and there must be takeaways. That is the whole story arc from start to finish, okay? All of your stories inside will also have those similar bumps. Setup, tension, resolution, takeaway. Next question, setup, tension, resolution, takeaway. And the whole thing with all the themes that we know means that a host can then bring this all back together. The setup happened, you told some stories. We built tension, told some stories. There was a resolution, you told some stories. There was a takeaway, you told some stories. And hopefully if you're any good, your takeaway will link to the themes that started right at the beginning. Maybe you had a tough childhood and it taught you resilience. The takeaway at the end is resilience builds millionaires, whatever it might be. That's maybe a terrible example, but the point is there's more than one way to build a story arc. Another really important part, I've moved on to really you now rather than what we're doing. You need to give epiphanies and moment-based anecdotes. Epiphanies are the part where someone goes, I hadn't thought about it like that before. And those are the bits you go away and you tell your friends, you tell your partner over dinner. They're the bits that are remembered. If you don't speak in epiphanies and you just answer questions, you're not going to be remembered. And remember that winners give great sound bites. You've got to tell your sound bites, tell your stories, don't teach. Do not be a teacher. So let me give you an example of an epiphany. We had a guest on, probably our best guest for epiphanies, Dan Priestley. Go and watch that episode actually, it was really good. I asked him something like, how is AI going to affect our business over the next 3 to 5 years? He stopped, paused, and said, "You're going to have to decide whether you consume or create." That was the epiphany. So you've listened to the question that I asked. He gave that epiphany, and you go, "Whoa, I've got a decision to make here." There's intrigue, right? He's left me on a cliffhanger. What does that mean? That was the part people go and have mentioned to me. They go and take away and tell to their partners or their friends or the business partner, whatever it is. But he then answers the question and goes, AI is going to get so good that either you choose to be a creator of content and add to AI, add to the algorithm, or you consume. Because at some point you're going to have consumed so much that you're not going to be able to create. You're going to get into this horrible black hole of, it's too late to start, I've lost the algorithm, I've got no confidence. He's saying choose one or the other. That is a great example of an epiphany. And we've had loads of people who are incredible at dropping these epiphanies. They don't just answer the question. Never just answer the question. Have pre-prepared epiphanies. You should be able to think in your mind about a swipe file and go, okay, they've asked this question, I could tell that story, or I could give that epiphany. That's what I'm going to do. That's how you get the best content out of podcasts to then make your reach do the best and engage with the audience. Another part of performance that I think is underutilized is challenging the host. Okay, so as a host, I like when this happens occasionally. I don't want every guest to come on and challenge me, because I think what happens is that they can come across a little bit aggressive. But if it's done right, and if you think about this, you do it, 25 to 50% of the time when you are a guest on podcast, this can work really well. So we had a guy called Spencer Lodge on. He's the most well-known guy in the Middle East, the biggest following in the Middle East. He's got one of the biggest podcasts in the Middle East. He put me on the spot. We were talking about sales because he built some incredible sales teams, and he said, "Do you think you're a good salesperson?" And he then made me effectively pitch to him on something and try and explain how I would sell it. But he put me on the spot in front of my audience. I got to then say, am I good or am I bad? I have to make a decision. And I knew he was going to make me do something. He took the control of the conversation, twisted it and put it back on me. He showed his expertise over me. Brilliant, right? He knows more about sales than I do. But as a host, it throws you off a bit. So as I speak to you, someone who wants to become a top guest, and I now do this when I'm a guest, now and again, it is good to challenge a host, especially if they are leading you astray of where you want to go. So some hosts will have their own sort of, they're not thinking about the wider game. They're just thinking about content they can put on you. So they're going to want to say things like, I'm great at this, I'm great at that, you found me, I have a big audience. You can twist it by just giving them a little bit of a nudge and showing them you can challenge them and you've got better expertise in your given area. Just worth thinking about that one. Don't come across aggressive. Again, tell, don't teach, but be willing to challenge the podcast host. They're not the owner of everything. They own the podcast, sure, but they haven't got to be the big dog. In fact, a good host should be asking questions, listening, and then, going backwards and forwards with you. They shouldn't be challenging you and going after their own narcissistic tendencies. Definitely think about that and definitely engage the host. So we had a guy on recently who's basically a magician, right? He's got 1.5 million subscribers on YouTube. He's taught 10,000 plus people to be a magician. Now teaches people how to do YouTube as well. You'll see it on the channel if you go and check it out. He's called Oscar Owen. He was really clever because he engaged me with some magic tricks. And you might think, okay, that's not super relevant, but he got credibility of not just I've grown a big following of teaching people magic. I can do it. I can do it live right now. I can do it to a visual and just an audio audience. It's a bit more engaging and it's a bit different. It was a memorable insight. He also had researched me a lot, so he knew a lot about me. He knew a lot about the audience. He'd watched some podcasts in the back and he knew that no one had done a magic trick, funnily enough, on the podcast. And so why wouldn't he do that? I thought that was a brilliant way of doing something. So if you've got something that you can do or bring with you, definitely think about doing something a bit different. If you go back to one of the Diary of a CEO podcasts with Brian Johnson, the guy who's trying to live forever, the guy who sold a massive tech company for $800 million in the US. He came onto Diary of a CEO and he brought his supplements for the day. He spends $2 million a year on supplements to try and make himself live longer. He brought them all with him and he made the host try them. And he didn't like it, it didn't taste nice or whatever. It was an incredible amount of pills, but it gives him such a bond to the host leans in, the host's interesting, the host's tone changes. What that means is, the bond with the host, who's the person who has the trust of the audience, is elevated. Everyone driving to work or on a run or whatever they're doing, listening to the podcast goes, oh, this guy's sharing with our leader, our host of the podcast. It's a great way to engage the host and to leave the audience with a memorable insight. Some bits that I would definitely avoid: monologues. Okay, monologues are so boring. Like, do not speak for more than 3 to 5 minutes. 3 minutes is quite short, depending what the question is. 5 minutes is your limit, and when you've been going on for a while, your mouth starts to get dry. The host is looking down at the next question to ask, or they're trying to think. If they're not engaging you, you've just been speaking, monologuing for a long period of time, you've gone on too long. The audience are not going to be listening to you. People can't engage for this long, and you know that. You're even listening to me now. You're probably going, he's doing this exact thing. He's monologuing. This is different, right? I'm trying to teach you and impart some knowledge that I've got from this experience of doing 100 plus podcasts. If I was on a podcast, I'd be very clear. I usually speak 90 seconds to 3 minutes as the host, no more than that, because in that time I can set up a new question, I can create sound bites, and I can really put the emphasis back on the guest. The other thing I would not do is talk in loops. So try not to repeat yourself too much. Try not to use joining words like or or are. Be confident with silence. Avoid rambling, avoid repeating yourself, avoid monologuing. If you go and listen to some Joe Rogan podcast, you haven't got to like him or like what he stands for. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying he, on his podcast, is a master of controlling the silence. When someone asks a question of him, or obviously he's the host, so when he asks a question, he's happy with silence. If I talk to you now in this way, where I'm happy just to leave larger gaps, I'm speaking a bit more slowly, I'm able to leave larger gaps, it leaves room for you to think. It leaves room for you to ponder. It also gives you the impression that I'm thinking a lot more about what I'm saying. I'm less rushed. I'm more in control. And obviously on Joe's podcast, it's 3-hour plus episodes. They sit there and they have a coffee and they have cigars and they spend a long time. That's the format. But when you're a podcast guest, controlling the silence is far better, far better than monologuing, talking in loops, rambling. And so when a podcast host offers you up a question, you've got time to think. I asked a question of the last couple of guests that I was really interested in, which was if all of your tweets, all of your content, all of it was deleted from the earth and you had 60 seconds to give some advice to your younger self, what would it be? The first guest I asked it to just answered straight away. The second one, he probably paused for 40 seconds. I didn't say anything. There's a 40-second gap in that podcast that we left it. Because that shows how much depth of knowledge and depth of or strength that person's putting into getting the right answer. Another part that I really, really implore you not to do is do not stop talking abruptly. As a podcast host, you are thinking about a lot of things. You're thinking about what you're saying, of course, as a guest, I'm listening to you, but I'm also thinking about where we're going to go next, how long we've spent on this part or chapter of the podcast, any more information that I have down on my iPad that I might want to try and weave in. And so I will be looking at you, but occasionally you might have to look down, or you might look away while you're thinking about something else, but you are still, if you're any good, you're really listening to what the podcast guest is saying. If you stop abruptly, for any reason, you do it on purpose, you forget your train of thought, or you literally just haven't got anything more to add to it, you have put the podcast host in such a difficult position. They're probably not ready just to go, and bring up a new question or a new direction. Just make sure when they're looking away, when they're maybe looking at the camera or the producer, they are not ignoring you. They are not being rude. They are trying to manage something else and they think you're doing a brilliant job right now of controlling the environment. That's what's actually happening. Quite often, I try never to look down. But now and again, I'll have to look down because I want to remember a stat or something that I've researched on this guest. I'll look down and I'll look back up just to make sure. And the good people, the great top guests, just continue. They continue to look at me. Even if I look down, they're still looking at me because they know the camera's on them. They continue and they'll never stop whilst I'm looking away. So I'm looking down here, you know? The bad ones, as soon as you look away, they stop. Or they start to come to an end because they think you're bored. They think you're looking for the new question. It's completely wrong. We want to build and create the best guests. That's why you're here. So control the conversation. When someone looks away, do not take it as something bad. It's your time to shine then. Something else that I think is really, really important is to understand what a pattern interrupt is. And you want to try and get a pattern interrupt into a conversation. You can do this in a number of ways, right? You don't let the listener know what you're going to be like for the next hour or so. You want to control your tone. You want to have fun with it. You know, pattern interrupts change what people expect next and can be part of a really, really nice, familiarizing and trust building part of the podcast. You want to be able to change your tone or challenge the podcast host, lean in, lean back, anything to make it a bit different. You don't want people to know your next step. In fact, let me show you. Let's take a break here and go get some lunch. And that's an example of a pattern interrupt. I'm now on my way to lunch. It was something that you weren't expecting, but I'm still thinking about podcasting. Podcasting really to me is about the confidence of your thinking and the clarity of your delivery, right? So if you're able to think clearly and you have the same tone again and again, people will become familiar with you. For example, I speak quite quickly, but that's what makes me me. That's what makes my dad my dad. We have the same tendencies. So whilst people will say to you that you should speak quicker and enunciate, I think it's really important not to lose what makes you individual. So when someone tunes in and listens to you, they know that they're listening to you. A lot of podcasting is also overcoming that initial nervousness to either be on a podcast or to perform when those little red lights come on and you start to be on the camera when it's rolling. But that really goes away with more and more repetition. And if you're speaking about something that you know a lot about and you're passionate about, it will happen really quickly. It won't be long before you feel really confident and you get over those pre-podcast jitters. When we get to lunch, I'll give you a few tips on how I can get over them. Okay, we've arrived at lunch and I just quickly want to say I'm very aware that you can't go for lunch in the middle of a podcast. That's not the pattern interrupt I'm trying to show. I'm just trying to explain that a pattern interrupt is when someone doesn't expect your next move. So in a podcast, you could say something they weren't expecting, challenge the host, it all makes sense. Anyway, if you are struggling a little bit with nervousness around podcasting, some of the things you can do are some of the things that I do, to be fair. Coffee beforehand. Coffee always helps. Make sure you've been to the bathroom. Do a pre-podcast chat. So definitely speak to the podcast host before you start or someone in their team. Try and do something to calm your nerves so you understand slightly what's going to happen. Don't ask for the questions beforehand. That shows a little bit of unprofessionalism on your part that you can't think on the spot. And also a good podcast probably won't give you a script to go on. It's also really important that you do some research. This will calm your nerves so much. If you do research on the host, research on the audience, and of course, you know your stuff, you know your subject matter. So just brush up on a few of your epiphanies, a few of your stories, and a little bit of what's going on in the news around trends on your subject matter. Really, really important that you refine yourself and also keep your nerves under control wherever you can. Again, avoid waffle, avoid filler, avoid generic sound bites. It will knock your confidence in the long run. And remember that you're there to educate, inspire, and entertain. And speak in a way that creates loyalty and trust. And remember that every single episode that you go on, you can review. For example, with our business, with our community, my team will review every single podcast that our clients go on to make sure that they are getting better every single time. And you can do this yourself, right? We've given you some AI prompts that you can do this exactly for yourself. Anyway, have a quick break, get yourself some lunch, and I'll catch you in the next part of this program. Okay, welcome to this section. And this section is going to be about profiting. So how can we actually make money from getting all this exposure and going on podcasts? Before we go to the next section, which are going to be around repurposing, getting more exposure. This part is really important because without this part, we want to make the money that we want to be making. It's quite simple. We're going to run through it nice and quickly and make it as seamless as possible for you. I've got as much as I can on the board for you so you can really visualize what we're going to talk about. So, firstly, I would say, let's not skip ahead too far. Let's make sure we are organizing the appearances and tracking them in a mini sort of CRM. So when we go on podcasts, we know how many we've been on. We're trying to hit that 2 hour mark, number of podcasts per month. So that's 2 hours rather than podcasts. If you go on 1 and it's 2-3 hour episode, that's fine. If you go on 2 and so they're only half an hour each, try and do more. We want to do 2 hours. So we use Notion to track our appearances and also understand the exposure you're getting from every single one of those appearances. So I've just put a very, very simple CRM up here. I'm sure you've seen one, but this is how I would do it if you haven't got a Notion template or you don't know how to start one. Pods per month, we want to put in here 2 hours. And so this is the kind of CRM we want to do. So 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour, and so on. We've also then got pitched, booked, audience, launch. So how many have we pitched? And you can build this out differently, right? So the way that we would do it is you can click onto that and you can see, okay, for hour 1 this month, we have pitched 10, we've booked 2. What are the audience sizes? Maybe we've booked 3 or 4. What are the audience sizes? Which ones are the ones we want to go on now? Ideally we want to be getting in front of a minimum of 10,000 new audience members per episode. So you can fill all of this out and then launch. Let's not forget that when a podcast goes out, we want to control the launch. The host and the podcast team, if they've got one, they're going to really try to make a bigger splash as they can, but we can help them. We can ask for those repurposed clips. We can ask for the raw footage as soon as we finish the podcast. Reach out and say, as soon as they've got those raws, can I have them? We'll edit them as well. We want to put a splash onto our social media because every single time someone sees us, it's more value and more authority. Excuse me. So we can fill this out really, really simply, bringing in as much value as we can by just tracking what we're actually doing and also how much attention we're getting. It might be that someone said, on listen notes, or someone might have said in their, podcast booking brief notes that they had this size audience, but actually when you started to look into it, it wasn't that big. Can help you make decisions here on the audience size. Once you've launched, you've got a date, and you also want to have in this section the number of impressions you think you've got from this. So once it goes live, if they've put it out to their email list, you want to know how many's on the email list. You want to know how many views each of the reels they're putting out are getting, their YouTube video. Make sure you've got control of all of these, because if you don't know how many leads you've got from a number of impressions, this whole thing is a bit difficult. Remember, it's all about metrics, this part. So we'll get into this in a minute, but if we're going to get, say we get, 10,000 impressions from one episode with all the associated media, and we get 100 leads, we know there's a pretty good conversion percentage. But if we get 1, we need to look at why. So was the audience not as big as they said? Was the content that they put out not as succinct? What was their launch plan? All of these things we need to be tracking. Really, really important. We also need to be thinking about what kinds of podcasts we're going to target first and why. I think I've put this side. Yes, I have. So really important. I keep talking about this sort of wheel here, right? So it's really important that we understand that we're going to get on smaller shows with 500 to 1K downloads, or top 10% shows really, before laddering up to bigger shows, okay? Use those shows and your experience to get onto the bigger shows. We're going to leverage all of this experience, which is why I've drawn this out here. So say we start here on a top 10% show. You can see here as well, I'll put it here. We then know if we can get on top 10%, maybe we can go on a few of these, maybe 20 of these. We can go on 7, top 5, top 1, and then the top percentage. I just put it as a plus, like less than top 1%, top 0.5 and above. Go on top 10, keep going on top 10, maybe top 7, top 5, you can see what happens. It starts to build momentum. You're going to get invited on more and more. You're going to be on top 5%. Everyone from the top 10 is going to want you on. Everyone from top 7 is going to want you on because you've outgrown the scale of podcasts and the exposure. You've built your own audience. You've built your own mechanism. People are seeing you all the time. Once you get out to here, this is really terminal velocity, right? We're spinning so fast that we're only really going on top shows. You look at the Alex Hormozes of the world, the Grant Cardones, Joe Rogans, they'll only go on the top ones because they know exactly that they've done all of this, right? They've done all of this, and they've got to the point where they only need to go on top 1%. So they get invites for these all the time. You want to start here, just start building it out. And it might be that you stay here for a while, right? Because that's where we need to be looking at the quality of your performance, what we've just spoken about. How maybe you're not good enough. Maybe you're not talking in epiphanies. Maybe you're not giving sound bites to your what's going on, your audience. We want to spin this up and make it go as fast as possible. It's really important to get this to work that we are a repeat guest. It's not a bad thing to go on a show more than once, that's fine, but consistency across a range of podcasts in general is very, very good. We want people to keep seeing you. If someone sees you on a podcast, they see you on another one, that's double the amount of hours they're going to see you for sure, but also they know that 2 podcast hosts, and everyone knows the investment that podcasts cost, they've both trusted you. That's really, really important. Systems. In order to do all of this, we're going to need some systems, right? So we want to make sure we're leveraging AI. So you should have the prompts by now that came with the one pager and the email templates document in the description below. Utilize those AI prompts in there because they will help you to refine your pitches and refine the podcast you go on. They will help you refine the strategy. Another way to sort of get this to start working is to join a community like ours, but there's lots around, right, which literally holds you accountable to growing your brand through podcasts. This part, getting the momentum, is difficult, but I guarantee you, if you keep doing that, this is when you're going to see a lot of very quick growth. We need to elongate our time horizons. If you podcast now, in the next 3 to 5 years, your business could run solely on podcast exposure. That's the truth of what's going on here. Okay. The next part I want to talk about in this profiting section is not being salesy, having just spoken about joining our community. I'm sorry. So you don't want to be a sleazy salesperson. You want to get exposure, but we want a little bit more than that. So what we want to do is we want to mention our offer without killing the vibe. Yeah, and we can define vibe really by like how long the conversation might go on for. If you start pitching, the conversation is going to be cut very short and you're going to lose a great deal of your audience. So we need to lever a hyper-relevant lead magnet into the conversation. I put here, lean into the conversation. So really lean in. When you feel like there's something being spoken about, which is exactly relevant to what you do, and don't let it be the section where they ask about what you do. Let them ask questions, let the host ask questions about what you do, what's the misconceptions, where do people go wrong, how does this work, how does that work, why am I not losing fat if I'm a fitness coach, why am I always going through girlfriends and boyfriends, I can't keep someone down, I want to change my job and I don't know how to change my job, if you're a career coach, bad example. Lean into it, really lean in and go, yeah, people really struggle with that, don't they? They really struggle to do all of these things. Create a direct arc towards free value that you know you can give. So for example, if I was doing this and on a podcast, people are talking about why it's so difficult for people to be a podcast guest, why they're not making money out of it, I'd go, yeah, getting on podcasts is difficult. It's you need all the pitch templates. It's really helpful if you've got some AI that helps you. I can go, I've got this for you. I can actually give this to your audience. You just mention your lead magnet very nonchalantly. Do not push it at all. Be really relaxed. I've got something that could literally help your audience. If you don't mind, I could put it in the description. Lead magnet to description. Once you've said that, they're going to say thank you. They're literally going to say thank you. We'll give it to you guys. They want to give as much value as possible. All podcast hosts want to do is to give value to their audience. Super, super important. From there, they're in the description. And you can then email nurture people all the way through to becoming your clients. And we'll talk about that in a second. But the point is that we need to use an incredibly light call to action. And we need to, when we're looking at our stories in the previous section, try and think about where you might be able to leverage in your lead magnets, because it needs to be a light touch, but also there's ways in which it could go wrong, right? So it could go wrong if you make it a proper salesy lead magnet, something that people are not going to want to download, like, I've got a $39 thing that does this. No. It needs to be free, needs to be valuable, needs to be succinct. So for example, I could talk about a podcast challenge that I'm running. I'm trying to people to get on their first podcast. I could talk about whatever it might be, or a confidence booster pack to help people be more confident. You need to do exactly the same and give it to the host, give it to their audience, and then basically give people a reason to follow up, right? So you've got the freebie, you give them a freebie, and then you want to give yourself a reason to follow up with these people. I would also mention I sometimes would prearrange giving out something to the host. Some hosts will get quite upset if you start to give out lead magnets. You can, depending on how big they are, if it's a big podcast, top 5% and above, I would say, do you mind if I just give this, I've got this really cool sales process that I could give to your audience, it might help, and it's about the same angles we're going to talk about. They'll be happy with that. Don't just leverage in something, especially if the host does a very similar thing to you. Just be very careful. We want to make sure we're getting in with the podcast hosts, because they're some of the best networked people in the world, not being alienated by them. So, you've got the strategy. You know how we're going to get this in front of more people, and we know how we're going to leverage podcasts and record them, or record how many we're going to go on. This is what we want to then do, okay? We want to warm people up. So you need a specific email nurture for these people who have downloaded from your podcast. And it needs to start with a reminder. So it needs to start with a reminder that they found you on a podcast, because then you can put your social links in there. Of course, give them the download, whatever it is, but also in the email, remind them who you are, remind them what you spoke about. Don't make it too personalized, which is why we have these story arcs. So you speak about a very similar thing across podcasts. So you could talk about, I spoke about, my fitness goals or whatever it might be. This might be relevant to you. Try and make it so it works across the board. You don't want too many different email types, and give value. So you could talk about something else that they get. So that you can give them the freebie, and then you can say, we also use this strategy, ABC, this will help you to do the same thing. Warm them up, right? Remind them who you are. They might download it the next week, the next month. You want to remind them who you are and make sure you're speaking directly to them. Remember that Janet thing we spoke about? Make sure it's directly to them. Then you can think about adding more value. I would literally say, the next maybe a couple of days' time, give them something else, give them some more value and solve another problem if you know what their next problem might be. Try and help them overcome what might be their lack of confidence or their lack of motivation to move forward. And then you've got a testimonial. So I would send a testimonial. This shows how you've helped other people. And this one can also be a bottom of funnel where it shows how they can move into your ecosystem. So they can potentially come to a webinar, they can come to a challenge, they can book a call, they can come to a live event, whatever it might be. You could also start sending them a bit more tailored stuff if you'd like to. So this is the exact strategy that we would use. You want to get through this element, and then we want to go into value, right? So we'd send 3 value-driven emails. So that's how we can help. We want to then have a gap between each one of these. These ones here would be a day in between. So email, wait a day, email, wait a day, email. In these ones, you want to send 3 in 3 days. Then give it a 1-day wait, and then 1 every other day for 7 emails. These are to handle objections. And then we would do a gap, so a 3-day wait, and then every 3 days, you want a combo. So objections handling, so if they're lacking in confidence, you speak about how you've overcome confidence. If they are struggling with the funds, you speak about how you can get around that. Basically, the email nurture here is how we're going to turn a podcast into a sale. And this works across everything. We've got people that sell 50 to 100K packages. We've got people that sell 30 or $40 products. So really big scale. Don't worry if you're a consultant or you're selling some e-commerce stuff, it works for both. This is exactly how we would do it. And so when we're writing emails, think about what we've already learned in this free program. Think about the performance section. So story arcs. The story arcs in here can link to exactly what you already are known for, which is why then you can speak about them nicely on podcasts. Each email can be written in a way that has a story arc. It's positioned well, it has hooks. Copywriting fundamentals, like controlling the white space of the emails, are also super fundamental. Same with LinkedIn, same with any copy you've got in any of your blogs or any of your SEO. Control the white space, use simple, clear language, give enough value that people know they can become a winner by coming close to you. Do not be scared to give stuff away for free. Look what I'm doing now. This is a very long video, and I'm giving away literally everything. The only way that I can help you more is by helping you implement. So if you get this flywheel right, this is what you'll see. You'll see big revenue from these appearances. And once you've done all of this, like I said at the start of this section, it's time to repurpose. Because the more lead magnets you can get out there, the more people you're going to get in front of, right? And so the more this happens, the more podcasts you get on, the more traction you get, the more lead magnets you can get out, the more emails you can send, the more people you can convert if we can control the flow of podcasts. There we go. That's the profiting section. But next, we're going to move on to repurposing. Okay, welcome to this section. And in this one, we're going to be talking about repurposing. So now we've got all of that exposure, it's really time to start making a splash, making it as big as possible. We've understood how to make money out of this. We've understood how to perform really well. Now we want to show people how good we are and effectively to turn this one interview into 30 plus pieces of content. So how to reuse the episode on platforms like LinkedIn, email, YouTube Shorts. In fact, I put a lot of them here, right? So this is what we can do here. We've got YouTube long form. You can put your content onto LinkedIn, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Facebook, Reels, you've got posts, newsletters, Instagram Reels, Instagram carousels, you've got emails, Reddit. These are all the places that we can put repurposed content from our one podcast. Bearing in mind we want to go on 2 per month. So you've got a different visual here I really wanted to show you. So easily more than 30 pieces of content from 1 hour of podcasting. So that one podcast, got one long form YouTube video, and that can just be the idea comes from the podcast. You could have had a podcast where you were a guest and you decide that we had a really interesting topic. The audience decided to, they really lent into it. I'm gonna make a video about that. It could be you going to the podcast. It could be you literally just the repurpose of the podcast. So you take the clip, take the raw file, put it on YouTube on your own channel with the permission of the host. You could easily make 20 TikToks out of an hour-long podcast or a 2-hour-long podcast. You could easily make 5 carousels of you showing like stills of you talking with different hooks, different clips that people will scroll through on YouTube, they'll scroll through on Instagram, all sorts of places. You can easily get 3 long-form LinkedIn posts. But I think 3 is actually pretty conservative because you can have 3 easily, like I was on this podcast, we spoke about this, long-form content. But you could also, the amount of information, the amount of tried and tested hooks and topics that you're going to have from that podcast, speaking to another sort of thought leader, is going to make this really easy. We know that LinkedIn is a massive platform for thought leadership. Like easily 5 carousels, like I said, easily a newsletter as well. You should be easily able to put I keep saying easily, you should be able to put information from a podcast into a newsletter, and your following who are interested in what you do and are subscribed to your newsletter should want to know about the experience. And hopefully you're adding some different angles, different value to each podcast, and you're able to break it down, keep them up to date with what you're doing, keep them up to date with your thinking. 10 reels, easy again to just repurpose the podcast into short reels. And then 3 audio clips. So remember, you're going to have the audio file from the podcast that you can then put out into your own channels, but you also can make short clips, like 10-minute clips and snippets. Really important to remember that people will listen to and take in and consume content in really different ways. People that listen to podcasts, they tend to like long form content, written content as well. So they're going to listen to something that's 30 minutes plus. They're going to read newsletters, read LinkedIn posts. On the other end of the spectrum, you're going to have people who like to watch quick 15-second TikToks, or they're going to have 30 to 90-second Instagram Reels. They're going to love that kind of content. There is a gap in the middle of people that really like sort of in between. You'll see a lot of YouTube videos are 10, 15, 20 minutes. That's a different audience. They like mid-roll or mid-length content. So you can use this audio and shorter visual clips to fulfill that need. I just wanted to give you some tips over here on the types of tools that you can use to help you create this content flywheel effectively. So some of the tools that I'd recommend here, the script. So to make your sound bites, you can put your whole YouTube video or your whole audio, whatever file you get given from the podcast, into the script, and it will create a transcript for you. You can then use AI in the script to find some sound bites for you. Opus Pro is a really good tool for finding and clipping up interesting parts of your podcast. It's okay, you've got to do a bit of checking. Repurpose.io the same. Autopod's really good. So Autopod works with DaVinci, so you put the whole thing into the software. It will edit a podcast. So if you've been given a podcast, let it edit it up for you, and it will create social clips. These will all make this incredibly quick and incredibly easy. So we want to create a content flywheel. It's no good just doing, like saying, we want to repurpose this, we want to use these tools. We want to make sure that we're actually able to create this flywheel. And so the way we create a flywheel is we stop wasting time and we understand that one pod equals, these represent content pieces. So I've put at least 10, which I've described here. So you want to stop wasting time by literally making as much content as you can from one podcast. These tools will help you. Once you've got one pod, you've got all this content. You've got a second podcast per month. So in month 1, you've done, this could be 60 pieces of content. That's an insane time saving that you're able to put that much content out in different ways from one podcast. And all of this is high leverage, high authority. So you think by month 3, you've done 6 podcasts, you've leveraged 6 different audiences, and you could have put out 30, 60, 120, so much high quality content, plus anything else you want to do. Really, really easy to do this with all of these tools here. Also worth noting down some of these are tools, just some tools that we've used or recommend that help you schedule stuff. So Hype Fury can help you schedule, Buffer helps you schedule, Planable helps you schedule. So you put all of your content into these systems and it will basically feed it out onto these platforms as and when you decide, meaning that your time literally is spent doing one podcast every 2 weeks. You might spend another couple of hours just leveraging all of this media, using AI, using systems, and then filtering it into these softwares here. That's all you have to do, and then it's gone everywhere. So what you're effectively doing is using each podcast as leverage for more. Because what you're doing is you're effectively sending out into the world past interviews as proof. All of this content is proof that you're a great guest and you're really building momentum, let alone saving the time on making your own content. You're not having to dance on TikTok. You're not having to come up with new ideas. A podcast host who's done all the research on the market, the trends, and what you do is literally going to feed you the top hooks and sound bites that they want. You just have to repurpose it afterwards. You literally have to, that's all you have to do. Repurpose your own stuff, your own thought leadership that's been prompted for you. Easy. So it really does show to a new podcast host, that if all these people have trusted me, why wouldn't you? And you can see now that the more of this you do, the more repurposing, the more leverage you do, the better you get at this, the more opportunities you're going to get, the more you're going to build up towards bigger and bigger podcasts. So the goal really here is to make it easy to find, follow, and trust you, right? And so there's a few quick wins that we can do to make those 3 bits, find, follow, and trust a bit easier. So the first thing we want to do is optimize our LinkedIn profile and our Instagram bios. Really easy. ChatGPT can help you with this. But it's also inside, I believe, the description below. If you downloaded the templates, there will have been a LinkedIn 7-minute training video in there. Helps you build a top 1% profile. It's all in there. Instagram bio, put in ChatGPT, get the best one you can possibly get. Just make sure we're professional, we're succinct, we're understanding our positioning in one place. We call this part the check back. So when someone finds you on a podcast, we're putting out all this content, they're going to find you, right? We're going to get exposure. They're then going to check back, which means find you on one of these profiles. We normally talk about LinkedIn and Instagram, people to go and check who you are and do they trust you, basically? Do they want to become familiar with you? That check back validates you. It means you're real, you're not a bot. You are who you said you were. It gives someone a little dopamine kick in their mind to go, okay, cool. I listened to them on podcast, or I saw them in a piece of content. I now trust that this person has something that I want from them, whether it's knowledge or a service or a product, whatever it is. That's called the check back. We'd also recommend adding pinned posts to your pinned CTA posts, to your posts. So whenever you put a post on Instagram, put a pinned post at the top with a CTA. On LinkedIn, you've got a featured section. Put some sort of CTA in there, call to action in your featured link. So someone can click on you, they can click to you, a lead magnet, something like that. Remember to update your guest one pager regularly. You've got your Spotify playlist on there of previous appearances. You've also got loads of stuff on there that will be evolving all the time. Make sure you're updating that once every 6 weeks, or if you get on a great number of podcasts as much as you can, really. And then you can create a dedicated podcast page on your website. I'd always think about doing this on your website because it just shows so much leverage. You would show awards off, wouldn't you? You would show, accreditations. Why would you not show off how many podcasts you've been on, relevant topics you've been on, how familiar you are with an audience, how much your story and your positioning is resonating with a wider global audience, depending on what your business does. So definitely think about putting that somewhere. And then, like I say, focus on the 3 platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, and email, when we're looking at where to put all this stuff, because there is so much here. And a lot of people would say, don't put it everywhere. What I would say is, do put it as far and wide as you would like to, but focus and spend extra time on LinkedIn, Instagram, and your email nurtures. We all spend time on our email nurtures as business owners, or as hopefully you've got some sort of lead magnet. LinkedIn and Instagram are where people are going to go to validate you. So if we're looking at the flywheel, we really want to make sure wherever they're checking is where we are validating. Okay, the next part about repurposing. So what do we actually put in these parts? How do we know which bits are good, which bits we should repurpose? We must find our sound bites. I would take every episode you go on, download that transcript, like I said, use AI to find the most standout bits. You can use the script for this. You can put it into things like ChatGPT Pro to find the bits. I mean, for our podcast, for example, I have someone sat in the podcast on every episode while I'm interviewing someone high level, writing down sound bites for us. You know, timestamp, this time, Freddie said this, or Chris Doe said this, or, you know, Daniel Priestley, or whoever it is said this. Really important. We can then give that to the editor and we can find the parts that are going to make these bits, you know, the long form, the TikToks, the carousels, the newsletter, the reels, the audio clips, go or get as much exposure as possible. We don't want them to go viral, but we do want them to resonate, right? So the person who sits in with my podcast, she understands what we're looking to go for. She understands our angle, and therefore she knows which parts we're looking to basically spread far and wide. You can then, once you've got this, you can put a bit of ad spend behind if you wanted to. You know, go and put out 4 or 5 little reels with different hooks, different sound bites, and see which ones work. You don't need to do that. If you're just growing your organic audience, you can put 2 or 3 out without ad spend and just see which ones work. Definitely a good way to understand what people are actually resonating with you on. So that's how we do sound bites. I put here, find your sound bites first. What I would also do is I would create a swipe file. So a swipe file it's my terrible drawing of a swipe file. Effectively what it is all of your repurposed content, put them into swipe files. So this could be one podcast and you have all the bits underneath it. So you have different files or different documents within Notion or Airtable or whatever you might use, with your reels, with your carousels, with your newsletters or your emails. So that if you open up this document, which says, you know, Freddie went on Joe Rogan podcast, I can flick through. This is digitally, but you could do it printed off if you want to. I would recommend digitally. And I can see all the content we've used, when I used it in the past. I can send this on to people. If someone said, have you got any clips of you on this podcast? I can send it all on for more and more leverage. Really, really important. Sound bites, swipe file. So remember that sound bites are the bits that people are most hooked to when they hear. They should make your ears prick up. They could be contrarian, they could be a different angle, a shocking or just super educational piece, right? So make sure when we're doing the sound biting bit, they're not just things that you think are interesting. Get other people's advice, get AI's advice, really make sure it's something that stands out. It's something different, like I say, contrarian, super educational. It may be that you only put 2 or 3 parts, 2 or 3 sound bites into each episode, but in the early days. Later on, you'll get better and better. A good example of my podcast, maybe a year and maybe 2 years ago, we had Daniel Priestley on. If you haven't heard of Daniel Priestley, go and find him. He's a great guy in the AI space and sort of personal branding space. He speaks incredibly well in epiphanies and in sound bites. And the way he does that is he won't just say what he means, you know. And I'm sure this is in the performance piece of this program, but if you ask him a question, he will answer it in a soundbite where he knows you can clip that 15-second piece out, you can use that in the trailer, you can use that in a reel, it's going to get views, right? We need to make sure as well, whilst we're looking at sound bites so much, to also use visual storytelling, right? So like I put here, carousels. Carousels are doing really, really well because people are getting bored of the whole dopamine thing. The whole point of podcasting is because we want long form content. Like I said, the audience who watches long form is going to like to read. That's probably more their cup of tea or their prerogative. So we're using visuals. Remember that everything needs to be edited really nicely together. Don't lose an opportunity to gain an audience member because your execution on the carousels is not high quality. Sometimes Instagram, for example, will compress the video or a carousel and make it poor quality. Take it down, start again. Let's make sure the quality is high. Let's use text carousels, visual storytelling, to make sure that our quality is high. Everyone knows what they're going to get from us. And like I said, put everything into a repurposing swipe file. And this is exactly how you build out a content flywheel from podcast guesting, right? So you don't need to spend time creating low value, low engagement content. You've got proven content supported by high leveraged podcast hosts, and you can take advantage of their engaged audiences. You're literally getting told this is going to work, so just take it and put it out there into the world for your own audience. Because remember, you can tag the podcast host that you've been on. So if they've got a decent audience, if they've got a top 10% podcast, they will have a decent audience. You can tag them. They may repost, they might put it in their stories, they might write a newsletter about you. You want to show that your proximity to them is validated and other people can trust you. Remember, this is all about leveraging trust. We need to get really good at performing on podcasts. We need to obviously get on the podcast. We need the back end, right, which we've already just spoken about in the profit section. But we also need to be able to do this part. Spread out our information far and wide so as many people as possible can see us. That is how we create a content flywheel and leverage all of the content that we've created from these engaged audiences. Crack on, you can do this. Okay, we made it. We're back to the start with the good trusty podcast mic in front of us. So over the course of this program, we've covered literally everything you need to know to get started on your journey to becoming a top podcast guest and making it your most profitable marketing channel. We've covered what a podcast guesting strategy is and how to develop one. We've touched on how to perform on podcasts, create story arcs, speak in epiphanies, create sound bites, as well as control the conversation and speak with absolute confidence. We've spoken about how to create a revenue stream, how to set up your emails, how to copyright, how to leverage your platforms like LinkedIn and Instagram, how to leverage a content flywheel and save time to gain authority, as well as how to optimize this full strategy along the way. You've got templates to help you, and I hope you filled out your workbook along the way to really make the most out of this video. So hopefully by now you've got a much better understanding of how you can approach podcasts as a professional marketing channel that seemingly everyone else is sleeping on. No one's really taking advantage of what podcasts are and what they are becoming. Remember to keep coming back to this video, and if you've taken value, feel free to subscribe. But now I want to set you a challenge, because learning without implementation isn't going to get you anywhere. And I know you've done stuff. I know you filled out the workbook and downloaded the templates. I'm sure you have. But I'm going to set you a challenge because I'm so confident after looking around and taking a number of challenges myself that I can take you much further than most people with podcast guesting, even within just 30 days. Especially after you've just sat through and participated in this full tutorial that I've put together for you. Now, what's more valuable? Putting your money into another scammy course with the hope that it might work from these other people, or ensuring that you know how to be a professional podcast guest within 30 days with me. So I'm hosting a 30-day challenge. I've decided to do it. Not only are you going to get around a mentor, which is one of the most beneficial things people can do to be handheld through their new endeavor, you're also going to develop strategies that really suit you. There's also going to be other tools and indicators that I use to grow my own business using this exact method. I'll give you even more tools and support you on how to take this channel to the next level whilst your competitors are being left behind dancing on TikTok. My goal will be to get you onto 2 to 4 podcasts, performing live within 30 days. Are you up for it? It will absolutely blow your mind how far this can go. We've barely scratched the surface with our podcast. I go on 2 to 4 podcasts a month and I can scarcely believe how far it takes me. It's a tiny entrance fee, and I promise you this, you'll learn more and become a professional in 30 days than you will anywhere else. How do I know? Because I've seen it all and we've done it before. If you've got any questions about anything that I've spoken about in this video, please feel free to fire them into the comments below and I will make sure I answer them all. If you're interested in the challenge, get signed up and I will see you on day 1. Can't wait.